it in there. Hello. No pressure. I mean, really. I'm Michelle Hills, and I want to thank Jane and Ragaza and Gretchen and the committee for inviting me to speak today. It's quite an honor, and I was truly humbled by the invitation. You know, everyone has dates in their lives that stick with them. Your first kiss, okay, well maybe that wasn't so memorable, so it's not one of mine. Your wedding day, the day your children are born, the day a parent passes. Well, one of those dates for me was February 27, 2020. My cancer journey started there, but unbeknownst to me, I was packing my suitcase for it much earlier. That was the day we were gathered as a family to honor and bury my dear father, Tom Welly. He had passed away earlier in the month. Excuse me. The morning started with John and me hosting breakfast for our extended family. My dad was the breakfast guy. He loved to make pancakes, and we were honoring that tradition with lots and lots of pancakes. At 10 o'clock that morning, my sister Lizanne and I were set to start Dad's celebration of life with our eulogies. The evening before, as I was on my way home from Walker Funeral Home, I received a message from my primary care physician to call her back. I called her as the breakfast was getting started, and I left a message with her receptionist that she should not call me back until the next day, Friday, because I had a pretty darn good idea of what she was calling about. I'd been getting mammograms since my mid-30s, since my grandmother was diagnosed in her early 40s. And I usually scheduled my annual mammogram for the week between Christmas and New Year's. Is this because I'm doing something with this? Okay. Do you guys hear that hum, or is it just me? All right, I'll hold. I usually scheduled my mammogram for the week between Christmas and New Year's. I simply forgot in December of 19 because we were dealing with my father's declining health from stage 4 prostate cancer. So I rescheduled it for early February. As I was heading to the test that Monday morning, the 3rd of February, I stopped to say good morning to my dad and my mom. They lived around the corner. When I walked in, it was apparent to me that something had changed and that my dad's passing was not far off. So I called and canceled and rescheduled again for a few weeks later. My dad passed 2 days later. The whole mammogram experience was different for me this time. I rescheduled the mammogram on Monday, February 17th. 4 days later, I was sitting at a conference table at Toledo Volleyball Club. Yes, I was a volleyball mom. Previewing my dad's eulogy for my team. And I got a call from the Women's Center asking me to come in for an additional screening. This wasn't the first time that I'd been called to come back in. It was never really a big deal. I mean, one year they were concerned because they saw a spot and it turns out it was a mole. They forgot to put a little thingy around it. Whatever. I figured this year would be the same. I agreed to go in the following Monday, and I told them it would be the only day that week I would be available, as the rest of the week would be devoted to my father's funeral and the family events. I didn't really expect much, and John was out of town. He was in Florida playing golf, and he was expected home Monday night. And I told him, just keep your flight, everything will be okay. But I thought I should have someone with me on the outside chance that something was wrong. So I called my sister and asked her to come with me. It was the first of many times that my sister Lizanne said yes. When I went from a diagnostic mammogram to an ultrasound to a biopsy, I was pretty darn sure we were looking at breast cancer. On the way out, they had me meet with the breast navigator. How's that for a job title? Again, different than prior mammograms or callbacks. Well, 2 minutes after I had left the message for my doctor to not call me back until Friday, she called me back. We've been friends since high school, and she had not heard that my dad's funeral was that morning. She was annoyed, but probably not as annoyed as I was. I could have said, let's talk later. But at that point I said, just spit it out. That's when she confirmed with those 4 little but monumental words and life-changing words, you have breast cancer. I said, okay, thanks, hung up the phone, went in the kitchen, and got out more syrup. We had a beautiful service for my dad. And in a particularly ironic twist, two of my brothers told me later that evening that I looked really good on the altar delivering the eulogy, with one mentioning he never realized my boobs were so big. Note to self, the black turtleneck clearly would have been the better choice than the white one. I kid you not. I thought to myself, are you referring to those things that are trying to kill me? Gee, thanks. I made a conscious decision after the conversation with my doctor that I wasn't going to think about it or focus on the diagnosis. This day was to be about honoring my father and not about me. Perhaps that's an example of positivity. For me, it was simply a matter of surviving what was already going to be an exceptionally emotional day and evening. In a week that was filled with one emotional event after another, we had some very happy news to celebrate. Our daughter Maggie got engaged Tuesday of that week. At a concert that her fiancé, now husband, had purchased tickets for and planned the big ask for months. We were thrilled, and we decided we would celebrate that great news that night after the funeral at Ventura's. Because in our house, Ventura's is where you go to celebrate life's great moments. It was quite an evening. Unfortunately, I spread my diagnosis on my kids later that night, after almost everyone had way too many margaritas. Hence the comment from my brothers. But I wanted to tell my children in person, and I knew that two of them, of the three, would be leaving very early the next morning before I'd get a chance to talk to them in person. My timing wasn't the best. Talk about sucking the air out of a room. I did it. But I think when someone receives a diagnosis like breast cancer, that your peeps take clues from you as to how they should react. If you are calm and thinking positive thoughts, they will as well. Again, I don't think it was really a conscious decision on my part to project that positivity, but I knew that I inherently did not want to be a Debbie Downer. And aside from springing the news the way I did, I've tried to project a positive attitude and demeanor. As I was thinking about what I wanted to say today, I reached out to friends who were dealing with breast cancer. A high school friend who was dealing with her third recurrence told me, "Sure, I get down and frustrated, but aside from breast cancer, I am in the best shape of my life, and my goal each day is to focus on what's good in my life and to be grateful. Drink the good wine, use the fine china, and never let a day go by without telling those you love that you love them. Tomorrow is not promised to anyone." Excellent advice. I also reached out to a Facebook group that I joined after my diagnosis. This particular group deals with the side effects of aromatase inhibitors, the reason that I am a constant hot flash. It's pills that those of us with hormone-positive cancers will take, some for 5 years, some for 10, maybe some forever. I seem to have the most in common with this group, so I put the question out there. How do I give a talk about the power of positivity when there are days that I find it quite difficult to get out of bed? I got several responses to the question, some very interesting ones. I immediately discounted the ones that told me I should have just said no to speaking. That would be counterintuitive to the idea of saying yes in 2022. The overriding response was that the best way to talk about positivity is to be real, speak from your heart, and to recognize it isn't always possible to be positive. You recognizing that sometimes being positive is just being realistic, and not to let the negativity of life, of a life-changing diagnosis, take you down a deep rabbit hole. Believe me, those rabbit holes are everywhere, and it takes some real maneuvering to avoid them. It's really important to honor all of your feelings, both the negative and the positive. By honoring them, you're helping your mind and body get to a better, healthy space. The other response that kept popping up was, make sure you talk about toxic positivity. I honestly had to look that up, as it really wasn't something in my daily vocabulary. But as soon as I read about it, I was like, yeah, been there, done that. An example of toxic positivity is telling someone who's going through breast reconstruction after cancer. Say that several times. "Oh my God, you are so lucky you get new boobs and a tummy tuck to boot." I can guarantee you that lucky is not the first word that comes to mind when diagnosed with breast cancer. Probably not the 10th or the 20th either. As both a past giver and recipient of some toxic positivity, This caused me a bit of introspection. I think you have to give people grace when they hit you with some of that. I choose to believe that most people genuinely care about me and have a positive intent, and their sometimes misguided words of encouragement are their way of dealing with their own fears. When my dear friend Shelley, who said I could not embarrass her, there wasn't any way to embarrass her today, but I understand you just won the raffle, right? Yeah. Well, when Shelley was diagnosed nearly 4 years ago with stage 4 metastatic breast cancer, and I would like to say Shelley is doing great. I called one of my very best friends from high school who was living in California. Yes, another high school friend with breast cancer. And I asked her, what can I do? What can I say? Susan told me that my job was to tell my friend, I'm here for you. Tell me what you need. If she thinks she doesn't need anything, offer to drive her to appointments. You cannot really believe how your life becomes one appointment after another, one treatment after another after a breast cancer diagnosis. Take her dinner. If she has young kids, offer to take them or pick them up from school or after school activities. Just be present. And for the love of God, do not say to your friend, you got this. That one took me by surprise. How many times have I said that to someone going through a difficult time or facing a difficult diagnosis? Too many to count. As she explained to me, you have no idea if she's got this. And to say that is simply not helpful. The statement minimizes the battle ahead and the uncertainty of that battle. And I've taken that advice to heart and have stopped myself from saying, you got this. When people say it to me, I just say thank you. And I look at it as an angel kiss from Susan. Sadly, Susan died 3 years ago this past March. She was an exceptionally positive person. When she called to tell me that her cancer was very aggressive and had come back and that she would likely not be around in 2 years, she wanted me to promise I would come to her funeral to support her mother. I had a rather colorful response to that, something to the order of blank that. I decided I would rather visit her when she was alive. And I was blessed that even being in California, I was able to visit several times. Her final words to me were, what the hell are we doing here? Good question. I do think Susan's experience and the way she dealt with her diagnosis helped me navigate my own journey. She often reminded me that we are constantly making choices in our lives and how we want to live our lives. And being positive and optimistic is clearly a choice. I so wish Susan had been alive when I was diagnosed. But I have a feeling she would have said to me, stage 2, 2 cancerous lymph nodes? Oh, come on, honey, is that all you got? When Jane asked me to give this talk, she prefaced it with, you are such a positive person and you have such a positive story to tell. Well, I had to think about that for some time. I came to the conclusion that yes, I'm generally a positive person, but certainly not 100% of the time. Just ask my husband and children. All through high school, my kids told me they were going to put my favorite comment to them, I'm sick of it, on my tombstone. Personally, I would far rather that they put my margarita recipe or my chocolate chip cookie recipe over my dead body. But that's a whole other conversation. In preparing for this talk, I realized that part of what makes me tick is making others happy. I truly do strive to be a force of light for people who are facing dark times, whether it's health-related or just life. I want to be the person that reaches out and doesn't wait for a phone call, whether that's a good friend with a new diagnosis or someone I don't really know but heard that they need support. Having an outward focus really helps one to be positive. That doesn't mean that being a breast cancer survivor isn't one of the first things on my mind when I wake up in the morning and when I say my prayers at night. And it sure as heck is on my mind when I step out of the shower and see my smaller, perkier boobs and my scars. I have lots and lots of scars. But those scars also tell a story of survival, and for that I'm truly grateful. My diagnosis came 3 weeks before COVID was declared a pandemic. And COVID had a huge impact on my treatment. I changed surgeons when the surgery kept getting delayed due to COVID. It was a very lonely walk into that surgery registration that morning in April of 2020. No one was allowed to come in. John dropped me off at the door, gave me a kiss, a hug, and said good luck, and drove away. He was told he had to wait in the car, but fortunately the surgeon told him to wait at home and that she would call him. My mastectomy was done on an outpatient basis because it was thought I would be exposed to fewer germs at home. In at 7, home by 5, sort of like dropping your car off to get serviced. It was brutal, absolutely brutal. When my mother had a lumpectomy 10 years ago, she spent 3 days in the hospital. 2020 was a lonely time for many of us with the COVID pandemic, and it was a lonely time for me dealing with breast cancer. I went to my appointments alone and my radiation treatments alone, but as lonely as I felt, I wasn't alone. I genuinely felt the love and support of so many people. When I look back on the experience, I continue to be humbled and grateful for all the little things and the not so little things that people did to support me and continue to do to support me. Starting with my husband, John. He never once made me feel less attractive and less a woman after having a breast amputated. As a self-proclaimed boob man, that was truly amazing. Even when I was at my most vulnerable and sad space, he was always there to lift me up and tell me how beautiful I was. My sister, from going with me from the initial mammogram callback through every step of the way, was with me. We were both dealing with the intense grief of losing our father. At the same time, we were trying to navigate the whole breast cancer thing. My mother, who had just lost the great love of her life, and who I was so reluctant to even tell that I had about my diagnosis, was there for me, checking in on me, making sure I was okay, and giving me her mostly helpful perspective on treatment options. My kids made great efforts to come home more frequently, and even my son Jack called more than once in a blue moon. My friend Lisa coordinated meals for what seemed like months. John had no idea that there were that many options for home-cooked meals. The flowers, the cards, the little gestures of support from dear friends and from people I barely knew. Members of the volleyball board did a drive-by parade for me on Easter Sunday, and I still smile when I think of that. Another friend lit a candle at a church for me each week. That's something that touched me very deeply, and I continue that tradition of lighting a candle at church, praying not so much for myself, but for all of us on this journey. And I do believe that my strong faith and the belief in the power of prayer helped me and continues to help me on this journey. But even with all the support, a person facing a breast cancer diagnosis and treatment ultimately has to do it on their own. We know there are people fighting for us, praying for us, thinking about us. We are the ones who have to go through the surgeries and treatments. And I felt fortunate that my bank of goodwill and positive affirmations was constantly being replenished by friends and family and people I didn't even know. I had tremendous support from the moment of my diagnosis through 6 surgeries and recovery. I was able to talk to friends who were also survivors. Each one offered to go to appointments if they were allowed to. They told me what to expect, both physically and emotionally. And one of the most powerful statements a fellow survivor said to me is, "Don't kid yourself. The physical recovery is just the first step." For me, the emotional recovery took longer. I could totally relate to that. I honestly didn't cry until after my 3rd surgery, where my infected expander was taken out and I was flat. I've cried a few times since then, but not too many times. But I do think the emotional recovery has been tougher than the physical. It's also hard because people see you and they think the battle is behind you. And I hope someday it truly is, but it takes time. There's a few special survivors that I talked to at the very beginning, Shelley, Stephanie, Kate, Beth, Janice, Cheryl, and many others. And I hope they all know that their support really established a power of positivity around me. And I vowed to do the same for the next member of the Breast Friends Club. It's a club that no one wants to join, but once you do, you're a member forever and you're a sister forever. And paying it forward is how we roll. It was only a few months after my diagnosis when another friend was diagnosed, and I immediately reached out to her, and another, and another, and another. It's absolutely crazy how many women I know who've been diagnosed with breast cancer. I couldn't really believe it when I decided in October of 2020 to honor a breast friend each day of the month on Facebook for Breast Cancer Awareness Month. I had more than enough women to honor. Some days I honored more than one. Some didn't want to be honored, and that's okay. The thing about breast cancer is each person's journey is different, and what works for one may not work for another. I learned so much that month just talking to fellow survivors and asking them to tell me their story. Most people want to share their story about their treatment and recovery and their hopefulness for a future that does not include a recurrence. The last day of the month, I honored the women I knew who had passed on, and I absolutely refused to say that they lost the battle with breast cancer. Heaven is full of many positive people who never gave up. The statistics tell us that 1 in 8 women will be diagnosed with breast cancer in their lifetime, and 1 in 3 who are diagnosed with early stage breast cancer will have a recurrence at some point. Those are numbers that can make even the most positive person cringe with negativity. I'm a 3rd-generation breast cancer survivor with no known genetic predisposition. 4 years ago, I did the genetic testing, which showed no genetic markers. It also indicated that getting breast cancer in the next 5 years was at 3%. Well, how did that work out? My doctor told me they just haven't found the gene yet. My grandmother, as I mentioned earlier, was diagnosed in her early 40s. I can still recall dress shopping with her at Parkway Plaza and her sending my sister and me back into the dressing room because she forgot her boob. They did not do a whole lot of reconstruction in the 1940s. She died at 78, but not from breast cancer. My mother was diagnosed at age 75, and she recently celebrated her 85th birthday. She's right there in the yellow. Yay, Mom. My prayer each night is that 3 is the charm and breast cancer ends on our family tree with me. I do not want my sister, my daughters, or my granddaughters to ever hear those 4 awful words. There are advances in breast cancer treatment every day. That's why it's so important to support the organizations that are doing the research. It's equally important to support the organizations that are bringing services and support to women recently diagnosed. I was blessed, and I know I'm a lucky one. It's far easier to be positive when you have such a strong posse. Our goal should be to reach out to those who are not as lucky. Many women do not schedule a mammogram because they don't have health insurance, or they don't have anyone to take them, or they don't think it's important, or they think it'll hurt. Since my diagnosis, I'm so much more aware of the resources available to all women, regardless of any ability to pay. In addition to Susan G. Komen, there are other organizations out there who provide valuable resources. The Victory Center is one. And I am a new member of the Lammy's Legacy Board, and a personal mission of mine on that board is to do what I can to bring the message of what is out there for our underserved communities to honor the memory of Lammy Guyton Stout. I was going to take a moment at this point and ask everyone to stand up who is a survivor, but since Jane already did that, we'll skip right through that. But I want you to know we are in this together. Thank you all for being here today. I also want to thank everyone for being here to support the power of positivity and the local office of Susan G. Komen with your time, your talent, and your treasure. I know we all have other places to be and other things to do, and I'm really humbled and grateful that you all chose to spend a few hours with us today. I want to thank Jane and the Ragazza team for dressing me in this beautiful outfit today. But most of all, thank you for underwriting this event so that every penny from every ticket sold will go to the local efforts to fight breast cancer. Before I conclude, I want to share something that Good Morning America, Robin Roberts, wrote about optimism. Robin is a 2-time breast cancer survivor and has had many other serious health issues in her life. I had the opportunity to hear her speak last year prior to the Solheim Cup. And if there's a celebrity to emulate with their positive outlook on life, it would be Robin for me. She said, "Optimism is like a muscle that gets stronger with use. When you want to build a muscle, you got to keep using it. Well, that's how you have to be. And I'm an eternal optimist. And so I can find those little silver linings, those little moral victories. And it takes courage to believe that the best is yet to come. And I too believe the best is yet to come." In closing, I'd like to say thank you to my husband, John, who would love nothing more than to be here having lunch with all of us beautiful ladies and the gentlemen in the back. But he graciously agreed to volunteer to stay home and babysit for Johnny and Molly. I'd like to recognize my mom, Ann, my sister, Lizanne, my daughters, Kelsey and Maggie, and my mother-in-law, Mary Hills. She wasn't able to come this morning. My sister-in-law, Jenny, and my Aunt Francie, who are here today to support me in the cause. And it warms my heart to see so many friends in the audience. I'm feeling the love from family and friends who could not be here today as well. If I can conclude with one thought, it is that each of us should try to find a reason to be grateful each and every day. I have found that it's nearly impossible to be negative when you are feeling grateful. If you are dealing with breast cancer or any life-altering diagnosis or life-altering event, or you want to support those who are, just know that being present and real and honest is the most positive thing you can do. If breast cancer has taught me anything, it is that. And finally, if you are overdue for your mammogram, get it scheduled and get it done. Do it for yourself and do it for those who love you. Drink the good wine, use the good china, and tell those you love that you love them every day. Thank you so much, and God bless.